All right, today's episode, basically, we're going to start off by saying
It's a two-parter, right?
it's a two-parter. It's going to be essentially looking at two different profiles of jiu-jitsu people. This isn't saying everyone falls into these, but we're going to look at two ends of the spectrum.
It's a spectrum. It's a range.
That's right. You have a range of strategists and improvisers. When I say an improviser, to me, this episode will be the improviser. The improviser to me is someone who, when you're slapping hands with your opponent, you're not thinking, you don't know what you're going to do necessarily. All you know is I'm going to slap hands, and then once we start rolling, I will make decisions according to the stimuli that is being sent to my brain, and whatever they're doing, I will react. The strategist on the other end comes into something, maybe they've studied their opponent's habits, maybe they have a game plan, they know this is my strength, this is his weakness, here's what I'm going to do. So those are the two extremes. Mm-hmm. Anything you'd like to add, change about those definitions?
No, I think they're good.
Okay, so if this episode we're trying to hone in on who the improviser is, the artist.
Sure.
I like that. The artist versus the strategist.
Okay.
We're looking at these two profiles today. We're doing the improviser. Where do you see yourself? Do you associate with either end? Do you see yourself in between?
I will say that I've shifted a lot over the years. I for sure was a very much an improvisation, creative guy early on. But over the years, I've systemized a lot of my approach. But I believe that plans are meaningless, but planning is essential. So I have systems in place for everything, and how I go about executing the systems or which systems I used, that becomes a little bit more on the creative improvisation side of things. So, I may have a plan for what I want to do, but it doesn't mean I get to pull it off. So I need to improvise, and I improvise with a system, right? I bring a new system to the table. So if my closed guard system is not working, I will transition and move on to a different guard system, maybe a half guard or butterfly or spider or lasso or whatever. And then that becomes my improvisation. And now I solve a problem with a different tool. And then if that fails, then I, improvise again and I move on to the next system.
So you mentioned earlier when you were younger that you were more improvisational. Is that meaning you were more running on emotions and just...
No, I would, because I knew less when new problems got presented to me, and I may not have had the best solution or even the best idea on how to solve them, I would improvise the solution. So I would think, well, if this worked here, this might work in this place, and try it. And if it didn't work, then it didn't work. But I became very good at very quickly adapting solutions for problems into other problems.
Do you think that the higher you go in the skill level of jiu-jitsu people, you're going to have more logical strategists at the top, or more of the creative, just go with the flow, figure it out as you move?
So I think, if you look at white belts, right, white and blue belts, they tend to be more on the creative side because they have to be. They don't know as much. Just by default, they don't have answers, so they got to come up with something.
It's like walking into a kitchen and you have there's a chef who's been doing it for a while and sees all these ingredients and goes, all right, I'll put in 2 cups of flour and 1 cup of sugar. And then you send the brand new guy in and go, all right, do something. Well, fuck it. I'm going to put some, mash some banana up and put a little Tabasco sauce in here.
It'll be good. Yeah, right. And, and I think as you go up through the ranks, definitely by the time you get your brown belt, you become much more systemized, because you at that point, you should have mapped out a lot of reactions and understand behaviors and patterns of attack, patterns of defense, and you understand where the successes are and where the failures are. So I think by brown belt, you become very systemized. Mm-hmm. Even early into your black belt. But then eventually you get to the point in a black belt, let's say you've been a black belt for a while, let's say 10, 15, 20, 30, or like Marcio, 40 years, I I think at that stage, it's just like Neo in the Matrix. You know what I mean? Like, it's not so much understanding the rules, but he just sees everything. People just see things, and they can very quickly flow from one pattern of attack or one series or one system, one guard style or one technique into another very seamlessly because they understand everything. You know, it becomes more transient. So I think you go from being creative to very systematic to something above that, something past that, where it's not necessarily a hard solid system, so much as it is a fluid system where you can easily adapt and easily systemize as needed.
So then it's almost like full circle. After you become the logician, you become like a high speed, almost computer who processes things so quickly that it becomes so smooth that you're almost like back around to you could just do whatever you want because you can see all the paths. And
but I think the difference there, though, like that's where like experience comes in, and people don't understand it because I'm sure there's people listening. They go, "Well, I do that." Shut up! No, you don't. There's very few people that can do that. You know, the experience level you need to do something like that is gigantic, and I think it's easy to overestimate our ability. You know, look at so if a, you know, like your chef, the example of the chef, right? So if you have let's say you have a horrible and eclectic selection of ingredients on your you know, kitchen, and you call, you know, a newbie cook, and he may, like you say, make something stupid like bananas and Tabasco, you know.
Which I'm not certain that's not good. As I think about it, it might be good. I'm gonna try it later.
But you know, if you bring in somebody who's been cooking for a while, who is really really good, let's say, you know, a local chef who's been cooking for 30 years, he may think, well, my options are very limited, but I can make something good out of this. And then if you get a guy who's, let's say, like a Michelin star chef, let's say like a Gordon Ramsay or not Ramsay, what's his name?
Gordon Ramsay.
Is it Ramsay? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I got it right. Or like, you know, or any other.
Oh, it's Gordon Ryan, sorry.
No, that's not him.
No, that's not the chef?
No. But if you get like, you know, a Michelin star chef who is obviously above just being a good chef, like he's like an excellent chef who's been around, understands, studies culinary arts, right? They may look at the kitchen and they may say, man, I have to get creative here because there's very few options. But what he does with this creativity will be far superior than both the newbie who was creative and the chef who's been around for a while. You know, and I think that comes down to experience level. You know, it's hard to explain the difference there.
Well, that's a good point that you bring up, where in order to be an improviser, be able to work,
to be an effective
improviser, or moving away where you're kind of expressing yourself or doing what you feel would be the right move, you have to have some control. You can't be like a good improviser if you're never in a good position. If you're the guy if you're just being smothered on bottom, I guess you could go, look, I'm improvising. I'm moving my left hand around in circles.
Right.
Great, man. But maybe like do that in a way that actually means something.
Right. You know, and what's the artist that does the paint splotches? The real famous
Jackson Pollock?
Pollock, yes. You know, you can take a 2-year-old, give him a bunch of different paint and tell him to throw it on a wall. And then, you know, you can have somebody who's studying art who's like, well, the kid obviously did the same kind of thing, but it's not, the composition is not the same, or the you know, the colors are not good. And then they may try and replicate it, right? And go, this is much more like Pollock. And then Pollock goes out and does it, and he does it very much like the kid. He's just throwing stuff on there. But for some reason it works for Pollock, but it didn't work for either the kid or the college student, you know, and I think that's experience level, the ability to become fluid above a system, to become fluid as a creative, on the creative side of the scale. You have to have a very deep understanding and a very systemized approach to jiu-jitsu in order to be effectively creative.
When people are starting out and let's say they're listening to this and they're relating to one or the other profile, and let's say they're going, I'm the improviser. Mm-hmm. Would you try to direct someone to be more of a strategist starting out, just because is that the safer route, and then say maybe down the road, once you have a tool belt that you can pull from, you can start improvising? Because I feel like I drift towards the improviser, because a lot of times I start reacting. Whether it's better or for worse, when I roll, a lot of times I am reactive. I'm not always proactive, and I know you've before said, like, hey, now you have to move, now you have to be the aggressor. I just naturally will fall into reactive. I'll let the person do something, and then I'll try to work something out. Is it setting yourself up for failure if you're taking that position right away of, I'm just going to do what feels right, and then you're sitting on the side going, well, you don't know what's right, so... maybe.
Well, yeah, I think the way I teach is a little different than most places. From day one, not only are you learning techniques, we're talking concepts or why things work or how are they working. And to me, I have no problem with a beginner, a white belt or a blue belt, being an improviser, if and only if what they're improvising with is the concepts and techniques that they already understand. If somebody knows how to do an armbar, the concept of an armbar is very simple, right? Lever fulcrum joint. If you really understand how the braking mechanics work, the controlling mechanics, what causes it to be most effective, what causes it to fail, and you have a very deep understanding of that armbar, and you want to apply those concepts to different, joint locks that you're doing, I'm okay with that. What I'm not okay with is thinking that you understand a technique or a concept, trying to modify it and trying to apply it to different techniques that have nothing to do with it. That's where failure ensues. And the other thing to be cautious of is if early on you're an improviser and you're an athletic person and you come out ahead, it's very hard to convince people that the results aren't proof of success, because you can have a white belt who's very, very athletic, who improvises on something and gets a janky tap, and you have to go to them and say, hey, that was garbage, don't ever do that again. And they say, well, it works. That statement, well, it works, is not some sort of genius statement. It's not a proof of brilliance. That's proof of idiocy.
Well, and it works. It's not proof of your jiu-jitsu working. It's right. Proof that with crappy jiu-jitsu and your athletic ability, you made it work. Yeah, and your opponent's complete lack of it.
in this specific situation, right? So, no, I think early on, people should try to be more methodical and more on the the tactician side of things. However, to do that, you also have to have experience with the system, and systems are usually developed out of creativity, right? Out of this happened, we need to have a solution for it. And then, you improvise and you create and you adapt. So they kind of have to work hand in hand. Usually people, when they start, they'll fall to one side or the other. And then the more creative improviser people, they tend to be more successful early on, white, blue, even early purple. And then the people that tend to be more on the tactician side of things, the strategists, they tend to be not as successful until like purple, and then purple and above they become very, very successful.
Which that's interesting, because you have to be a very special kind of person to. I always respect the people who are those that didn't start to get good and see results until like purple and brown belt. Like you've talked about people in the past where you go, well, this person struggled and got their ass beat all the way up until like purple and brown belt. And I sit there and think that takes a ton of discipline and determination. Absolutely. To keep going for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, just constantly just listening and going, okay, I will get better. It's so much easier for the person who
just comes in and does it.
Yeah. It's kind of like Jedi's, like the dark side and the light side. The dark side, they always say you can, not saying people who do it the other way are Sith Lords, although the Sith are always cooler in my books. But anyways, they say like this is the path that is the quickest and easiest to take. because it rewards you early on.
Right.
The path of the light takes so much longer, and it can beat you down mentally.
Right.
But you're building this really strong base.
Absolutely. And back to your Sith Lord Jedi example.
Who do you think's cooler, Sith Lord or a Jedi?
You know, when I was a kid, I think the Jedis. Mm-hmm. As I get older, I sympathize more with the Sith.
Oh, you sympathize with them. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Is it when Anakin walks in, like, Revenge of the Sith in the episode
Like,
3?
strikes down all the children.
Kills all the kids, and is that when you're like, yeah, I've had some rough kids classes, I get it.
No, like, you know, like, I mean, not to get too crazy in the tangent there, but, you know, the Jedi, the noble side of the Jedi, right? Those are things that you want to be, right? Selfless, you know, but they also, they're the extreme selfless. They're the true altruistic, where you also don't love, you know, you don't care, you don't, you become so altruistic that your feelings disappear. They're not important. You know, they're like, you love everything. Well, if you love everything the same, then there's no love, you know? And I think as I get older, you know, while that would be nice to do, I think it becomes more and more difficult. I think we should all strive to love everything, to be altruistic, but when push comes to shove, generally speaking, we protect us and ours before we do others, you know? And I'm not saying that that's something to be proud of, but it's something that we should admit when we're watching you know, the Star Wars. I think when you're a little kid and, you know, Anakin finds out that his wife's gonna die if he doesn't do something, and he goes to the good guys and like, well, if she's gonna die, she's gonna die. It just is what it is.
Yes, I remember watching
know?
the exact thing and thinking, that's an odd thing for the good guy to say.
Well, right, and if you're a little kid, you're like, yeah, you can't turn evil to save her, you know. And then like when you get older, you're like, fuck, that's my wife.
Right.
Like, I would, you know, I would do whatever it took, you know. And I think Star Wars is a great example of the dichotomy of good and evil and the philosophies behind it.
And it's not lost on me that as you say this, you sit there dressed in all black.
Yes.
So you're slowly drifting over.
Yeah.
I think if we fast forward 20 episodes, you're going to be sitting here in a hood.
Hey,
And
don't judge me.
and I'll be saying, Croyler, you've gotten a lot more wrinkles in the face lately. And your cackle will turn into more of like the Darth Sidious, like,
Yeah, maybe.
So, all right, I need your ability to get back to the path.
So
Where
we
were
were talking about, like, you know, how tough it is. How tough is it for the person who, by default, falls more on the tactician strategist side of things? Because the improvisers, since they do it better early on, you know, what happens to the strategists that struggle early on? That they suffer. I mean, like, that is something that they do struggle. There's plenty of people that are like, hey, I'm trying to do exactly how you told me to do it, and it's not working because this guy is behaving in a way that you don't know, that you didn't talk about, right? Or that I wasn't ready for. Well, that's because you don't have the tools. Well, give me the tools. So then you teach them a little bit more, right? And they're like, well, I was rolling with this improviser and he behaved a completely different way.
As the instructor, how do you keep those people on that path?
Well, I think that comes down to environment. You know, like, we have a very, very healthy environment in our school where I think I preach enough and I've drilled enough into you guys that the idea is to roll for technical growth and improvement, not for beating each other up or being a tough guy in the room. And I think because the vast majority of the people at our school, I'd say easily 90% of our students understand that. The people that lose, that get the worst of the exchanges because they're trying to be very systematic early on, they are okay with it because they see it as a data point that will be added to the system later. And over time, they become very successful. I mean, we look at guys like Blake, who has only really been training for like a year and 8 months.
Blake's a blue belt at our school.
Yeah. And he's very much a tactician, and he struggled, man, early on. Like, he really struggled, and the dude he never complained. He never whined. He never had any doubts. He just stuck to the system. He just stuck to the system. He just stuck to the system. And now the dude just, like, kills everybody, you know, in competitions in the school and other schools. Like, the guy's a savage.
What's interesting about him too is he could have relied on his physicality.
Absolutely.
Because he is in good shape. He's young.
He's athletic.
But he's one of the few people who was just able to kind of like drain, almost like take a pill before you roll, like drain. Oh, it's like in Black Panther when he'd have to fight for the kingdom. They would drain the like essence of the Black Panther out of him to like level the playing field.
Yeah.
It's like Blake does that before he rolls.
And
he like takes that out and goes, I'm just gonna roll based on technique.
Yeah, and then you look at him, less than 2 years later, and he is, tapping everybody. He's giving upper belts a tough time, and when he loses, he doesn't get up there pissed off and mopey. He just says, what can I do better? We did 2 privates in the past 3 weeks. He said, hey, I got these problems I can't figure out on my own. So we work on them, and then we worked on this past Tuesday, and then he like right after class, he's like, hey, I did those things 3 times today. And I'm like, oh, how did it work? He goes, not quite perfect yet, but it was better than before. And so he didn't tell me, hey, yeah, I got out and I tapped those guys, or hey, I failed and I got tapped. It was just, this is improvement. And I think if the tactician sticks with that mindset of I'm looking to improve, they don't suffer as much. And if the victory is improving, not the number of taps, the how bad you feel going through the ranks diminishes quite a bit. And then once they start being successful, once those guys, the tacticians, become successful, they tend to be very successful. They go from 0 to 100%, and it becomes very tough to deal with them.
If we're looking at advantages for, let's say, the person who has a good skill set to pull from, they can start being a little bit more flexible, creative with with the way that they're approaching their roles. Advantages they'd have. I mean, to me, one of the first ones is going to be opponents don't know what to plan for or what to expect.
Yeah, I mean, how much do we truly know when we're grappling somebody that we haven't met before? Right?
Well, if we're talking about people that, we kind of talked about the improvisers being at the higher levels, maybe that's when it's the best time to use it. You can research someone or have an idea,
Sure.
Or at the very least, you can watch the person compete 2 or 3 times before you have to go with them. And if you see the same habits,
right,
then
yeah. So the improviser does get the edge of the randomness of it. The improviser, one of the biggest things that they may have is they may break the rules, and that's something you see as a white belt. I think white belts are a good example of improvisers because they break the rules all the time. So if I mount you, you're not gonna shove me off of mount, because if you push my chest, I'm gonna armbar you. You understand that it is a solid rule. A white belt, you may mount a white belt. They don't know that, or even if they do, they don't care. So the suddenness of them shoving you off may catch you off guard, and all of a sudden they've gotten out, and it's like, wait a minute, that should have never happened. But you're so accustomed as you go up through the ranks to play by the rules that when you get somebody who just doesn't, then it becomes difficult, And I think the improvisers do that a lot. Not in as much of an extreme example as the mountain armbar, but I'm sure you'll see it all the time. And the improviser is always trying to break the rules, is always trying to create a scramble that benefits them, is always trying to create chaos. They're agents of chaos. And if they can create chaos and they're more creative than you, then they are more successful than you.
That's a very good point that I wish I would have brought up earlier. Chaos is a huge part of, to me, the improviser, or the thriving in the fog and ambiguity of transitioning back and forth. So that is very big. The person, I think improvisers do well when there's chaos, and they always, in a scramble, just end up being lucky and just finding a spot. So yeah, they can win in the scrambles, in the chaos. They can light the match and then find the submission while the house is burning down.
Right. And then when you get more on the strategist side, they're trying to control the chaos, right? Put things in order and understand that they're only going to behave a certain way because of the system that's in place. So that's a struggle back and forth. And I think early on, because it takes less tools to be an improviser, you don't have to know as much. understandable why they tend to be more successful early on in jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, if you look at the improviser, someone just causing the chaos and then taking advantage of that chaos, that would work easily on the new person who does not know how to reorganize and reconstruct a situation. If you look at the as the improviser as the arsonist and the strategist as the fireman, you as the experienced person know how to put that fire out a lot faster as opposed to just sending a civilian in there and they burn down and all the chaos. All right, enough analogies for now. Another benefit would be someone who is an improviser often can catch you in very weird positions that they didn't even intend to pull a submission off. You guys again scramble and then they go, you're like, oh, there's an armbar that came from nowhere.
Improvisers are usually the cause for innovation, right? So if you think about it, it always, I use the example of like the sword and the shield a lot. As men have always killed each other since the dawn of time, right? So like, it was hand-to-hand combat, then it was rocks, and then fire, and then sticks, and then, sword, and then it was like bronze sword versus steel sword, and then you got a bows and arrows, and then you have cannon. I mean, basically, like you evolve, right? But you evolve out of a need. So, if you have a system that works, and somebody comes in and breaks it, an agent of chaos, right? He does throw something weird. If you don't improvise with them, if you don't grow with them and adapt to their creation, you will fall behind. And that person then can basically dismantle your system by creating this chaos. So you then, as the tactician, you then create a new system that accounts for this behavior that you hadn't accounted for before. And then that guy then has to then be creative again because he's not going to beat your system. That's why it's a system. And then you grow and improve your system to adjust for that new change. This started back with like holes and my grandfather, right? So close guard worked on everybody as far as my grandfather was concerned. And then holes was the guy that said, hey, wait a minute, like I can't close my legs around this guy. Like, just by the guy being bigger, he caused issues to the system. And then you have to improvise. You look at half guard, butterfly, all these different styles of guards, they all came up out of somebody creating a situation that could not be solved at that time. And then we improved and adapt, like the example of 50-50. To me, 50-50 is the bane of jiu-jitsu. Like it's the worst thing in the world. It ruins matches. But for competition jiu-jitsu, 50-50 is amazing. It's a great way to stall out matches. It's a great way to get a couple points and chill out the rest of the time. And for years, like the rules couldn't even account for 50-50. They didn't even know how to score that position. So the rules changed and people started thinking of all these crazy creative ways out of 50-50, which then 50-50 had to adapt, right? The guards of 50-50 had to grow to adapt for those escapes. And now 50-50 is far bigger guard than it was, let's say, 5 years ago. You look at Keenan's warm guard with his lapel. Very creative, very innovative issue. He systemized it right away, so it made it even more complex. Then people started passing it. Little by little, people started getting around it. They struggled, but they figured it out. They adapted the system, and then they understood it, and they learned to break it down. So then Keenan creates more systems on top of that. He's got the squid guard and, all the other ones he's coming up with. So I think they go back and forth,
It almost sounds like the improviser or the sower of chaos, that's what we'll start calling it, okay. Is that the life cycle of progress where you have people who are the strategists who create this system and then they keep working on the system until someone comes in and tears it down, causes chaos, and then all the strategists have to like kind of reconvene and then they come back and they start building up around what was once torn down. Do you need those people to push jiu-jitsu forward?
If and only if you're only talking about the lower level guys.
Okay.
at the highest level, you understand jujitsu and its intricacies very deeply and very broadly. Like, you just understand jujitsu. If somebody illuminates you to a new position or to a new scenario that you're not accustomed to, right? An innovator, they come up with a new thing that you've never seen before. Because your depth and your breadth of knowledge is so large, that gets very quickly assimilated into your system. And it very quickly goes from being an innovation to a very systemized approach. And at the highest level, you won't stump anybody with a new position. If you look at the highest level guys competing today, there's nothing you can do to them that they don't have an answer for. Even if it's something completely new and ingenious that they've never seen before, they will have something for it, because they can there's so much knowledge in them as far as like the depth of any technique, but also the number of techniques that they can call for multiple concepts, multiple points, multiple ideas, and very quickly formulate an answer for the new problem. And the moment that happens, they've systemized that now, because now they know how that works or it doesn't work. If it fails, they will create a new answer for it, and it becomes a systemized approach to finishing it. So I think once you get to the point of, like, let's say a darker black belt, let's say somebody who's been a black belt for 10 or plus years, or somebody who just studies, it could be a younger black belt who just studies a lot, right? Somebody who's really, really logical and methodical and is an addict to the art, they will start systemizing even the things that they can't be planned for. And that's where creativity and experience and systems kind of merge.
So you think it's unlikely that there will be someone who comes along and completely stumps and wrecks?
Oh, like no, it happens all the time. No, that'll continue to happen. But that simply becomes a catalyst for a new system. It doesn't remain unique.
Okay.
You know, how can I put it? You are right. The creator, the creativity, the innovators, they will by default put you in situations that you may not be used to, but they are not aware of how they're doing that, right? And if they are, then it's not an innovation, right?
By definition, they're
systemized, right? And then on the other side, if somebody who is systemized sees that innovation, they will by default have to account for that in their planning. So at a simple level, at a very low level, I think of the creator, the innovator as an agent of chaos, and the tactician as a train who's got one track that they have to be on. And if they get diverted, they know how to get back on that track, and then they just stick to that track. But at a level up from that, it becomes fluid. Anything new becomes systemized, and anything systemized will be created and developed upon, because they can merge systems and they can merge attack patterns and they can merge behaviors. So yes, at a low level, the agent of chaos is going to be the guy that stumps people. It is going to be the guy that creates new things because they don't play by the rules. Mm-hmm. And then the tactician by default will be the guy that turns that rule breaking into the new set of rules, into the new laws of jiu-jitsu.
Okay. Are there people that come to mind that are kind of the chaos?
Oh, absolutely.
The harbingers of chaos.
Absolutely.
Who do you think like personifies that?
Like Nino Schembri back in the late 90s, early 2000s, he was definitely an agent of chaos. He was like a whirlwind of pain who just came out of nowhere, and he broke all the rules. He did things people didn't think they should be done, and you just couldn't stop him.
What kind of things was he doing that were different?
Well, I mean, it was like he was doing like flying omoplatas and guard, people would pick him up in guard and he would take their back standing up, and which stuff it happens now all the time, but it's not stuff that happened back then. He was, doing these crazy inversions that people now take for granted. At the time, he was doing, inverted sweeps, and he had an incredibly creative spider guard and butterfly guard. You see guys like, let me see who else was like highly creative.
What about you bring him up sometimes? Is it Terere?
Terere was very much
you-
a creative. Yes.
Okay.
He was an innovator. Nothing systemized about his approach whatsoever. He was a guy that flew very much by feeling and by how can I get to where I want to be. And Terere was very, very creative. Is another force like that.
He's someone that came to mind when I was kind of thinking about all this, because you have brought him up so often and said, hey, look at his stuff. And that's what a lot of his matches look like. Like he's just creating these scrambles, and the people who he's going against, who are black belts who know their stuff, just are frantically trying to like pick up the pieces and figure out
Build
like
something, right?
they're trying to build something as he's just like knocking everything down.
Right. Very much. He's very much one of those. Yeah.
Right.
And then like one of the things that I don't very much like is the whole like drill to win thing. Not there's anything wrong with drilling a lot, but like I said earlier in the show, plans are meaningless, but planning is everything, right? If your plans are so rigid, if your level of systemized approach is so rigid, like this has to work these specific ways, then you don't account for the agent of chaos. You don't account for a guy who throws, something out there you've never seen before. And usually what happens to those people that are not very creative, because they're on the drill to win mentality, where this pass has to work, or this armbar has to work, this sweep has to work, right? Because I've done it 15,000 times. It has to work. The moment that it doesn't, they can't be creative enough to fix and create a new system right then and there, right? Which would be the highest level, would be the idea to create new systems as needed. But the same way, you can't just be the guy who's just creating chaos for the sake of creating chaos, because that is going to get you in trouble if the chaos you're creating is not big enough to destroy the system that you're going against.
Yeah, and if you're just lighting fires in the house just to light the fire, eventually you're just going to get caught in the flames. And
Absolutely.
You're going to die in your own fire.
Right.
Part 2 of the artist versus the strategist.
That's right.
Last week, we focused on the artist, and we talked quite a bit about the strategist also, but the focal point of this episode will be the strategist, which, as we were talking last week, I don't think it'll be any surprise that I think you tend to favor or maybe relate more to the strategist.
Yes and no. Like I mentioned last week, I like to have a systemized approach, to fighting, but I think I opened with, plans are meaningless, but planning is everything, right? So I'm a guy who believes in systems. But my systems are not so strict that they do not allow for adaptation and versatility.
When we talk about the strategist, I'm thinking someone who makes their decisions based on premeditated plans or systems. They can be very meticulous. You can be a little bit less strenuous in your planning. Do you think it's important for everyone to be a planner to some extent?
Oh, absolutely. But again, your plans have to account for the lack of plans, like for the fact that your plans could not work.
But if you're the ultimate planner, you have a plan B, a plan C. A true planner would go, oh no, this isn't working, but it's cool because I have this in the back seat.
Right. And with everything, there's got to be a certain level for any true plan to work. You have to allow for some level of flexibility and for some level of adaptation.
Now, when we keep referencing plans, game plans, strategies, plans will vary from skill level to an experience from person to person.
Absolutely.
For, let's say, a beginner, what should their strategizing be like? Because you can't, as a new person, plan for everything.
Are you talking about if they were to compete, or are you talking about if
I'm talking
for growth?
I would say growth in just a general sense of, all right, I'm strategizing big picture now. I want to grow to this point, and I want to see my roles advance this way.
So if you're looking for growth, your plans should be very simple. The idea should be, I want to work my arm bars from the bottom. Okay, so you go to your coach, you learn a basic arm bar. Let's say an arm bar from closed guard. Very fundamental, nothing super fancy. and then you try to do it live and it fails, right? So if you want to be systematic and use that system for growth, right, that approach to growth, you would try that armbar again, and then it would fail again because you're a white belt. You just learned that armbar. It's not going to work. And what you should do at this stage is, instead of trying to become faster or stronger or, half-assing or cutting corners, you should analyze the failure. Why did it fail? Is it because my opponent behaved the same way twice? Because if you behave the same way twice, now part of your system becomes on counter-attacking or adjusting for that behavior. So let's say every time you armbar, somebody stacks you. Well, you have to have an answer for that so that they cannot stack you. Or if you do get stacked, you have a way out that does not include giving up the attack, right? And then at a level above that, you counter both. You prevent and counter the stack. A level above that, they would never even have a chance to start stacking because they would be that far behind. And that goes into your setup. How you're setting up would prevent the stack, which would lead you to a better escape later.
Should that person who has that game plan think to themselves, okay, whenever I start rolling with someone, I want to pull guard and try to get in that situation over and over as many times as possible?
Absolutely. Well, that's where, yes, that is important. A lot of people think if they train hard, like if they roll really hard, if I'm like huffing and puffing after every match, that I'm getting better. That's not true. You're only getting better if there's technical growth, right? And if you're wanting to work your armbar from close guard, but you never find yourself in close guard, you have not improved. That's why guys like Hajar or Neiman, they're very big fans of technical rolling, where you start in the position that you want to develop. So you want to develop armbars from close guard, you're going to start in close guard, right? Because that gives you an opportunity. Should your close guard fail, let's say they pass, or you tap them, or you sweep them, you reset to that position because it gives you another chance, another go at that place. Because if you don't do that, what happens is you may not find yourself, getting to close guard, much less trying an armbar from close guard in 5 rounds. It may not be something that you, especially if you're early on and you're learning.
Yeah, well, and it's a nice way to shake things up, especially the more you roll with the same people. It's so easy to get into a groove that where the roll's going. When I roll with this person, they'll usually they'll probably spend a little bit of time in half guard, and then they'll eventually get around my guard, and they'll be in side control, and then they'll go for the Kimura. How much should people look into adapting positional rolling into the game?
I mean, ultimately it comes down to your coach, right? How much does your coach do, and how much does he require of you? I think if you're incapable of achieving the position you're looking to develop consistently, you should incorporate at least once or twice a week.
Okay.
But, you look at our school, we do technical rolling really, truly maybe once a month, right? But I think I've beaten the mindset into everybody that the goal of every roll is technical improvement. So everybody is always trying new things without the fear of loss, but that's not very common.
When we're talking about putting a strategy together, big picture, what part does strength and conditioning, the physical well-being play in that whole strategy?
So strength and conditioning, it's tough because I'm going to get a lot of hate for this, but I think your strength and conditioning should be only to allow for certain movements to happen and for you not to get injured. And when I say by allowing certain movements to happen, I don't mean somebody who is strong enough to hulk out of something or force something to happen that shouldn't happen. I'm simply saying most people don't know how to use their bodies, so I've seen people that can't do squats. I've seen people that can't do a lunge or, leapfrog, basic body movements, jumping jacks. I mean, you watch the white belts doing jumping jacks. Sometimes it's halfway comical,
Have you seen that video on Instagram of a group of guys, military guys? I don't know what country they're from, but it is fun. It's like they've clearly never seen a jumping jack. Most of us probably grew up with jumping jacks at some point.
You'd be surprised.
Yeah.
I mean, so, I think strength and conditioning should mostly be about making sure that you're healthy enough to move the way you should, and healthy enough that your body can take care of itself. So everything isn't a strain, everything isn't a pull. You have a little bit of your body can protect itself, so to speak. Unless you're like competing to put food on your table, your jiu-jitsu should be very heavily reliant on technique, and even at that level, even at the highest competitive level there is, your focus should still be technique first, physicality second, or third.
If you're sitting there after work in your car thinking, okay, should I go to lift today or should I go roll and
Always
go to
go
jiu-jitsu?
roll.
You should always default to
roll every
roll.
time.
If your goal is to get better at jiu-jitsu, if your goal is to have like smoking hot bod.
Yeah, I mean, you can train to look good, or you can train to,
Right. If your goal is to get better at
Win.
jiu-jitsu, you just default, because you will get the fitness that's required to
Right.
perform the things your body needs to perform
Right.
through just doing it over and over.
I mean, look at so if you look at, let's say, a marathoner, right? Marathoners, they tend to be light, skinny, thin, tend to be on the shorter side of things. And then you look at, let's say, sprinters, right? They tend to be taller, longer
Huge difference,
legs,
yeah.
gigantic muscle build, right? And both of those people, the Olympic level marathoner and the Olympic level sprinter, they're both at an incredible top physical shape that they should be in, but they couldn't swap roles and do the same thing. It's not the same activity, right? So you can lift all you want to lift, right? And you can be gigantic. And if you have semi-decent technique and you have a lot of power and a lot of explosiveness, you could be difficult for somebody that has, a similar level to yours. The problem is the guys that have the highest level, they're going to nullify your physicality. So what it comes down to is, for you to be competitive with them, your technique has to be to their level, and your edge comes in with the physicality, right? Where most people think their physicality trumps their technique, and then whatever little technique they have adds to it. And proof of that is the most common statement after a tournament loss or win: I am so tired. If I was stronger, if I was faster, I just gassed out. They were stronger, they were faster, I just didn't have the energy. How about we shut the hell up and say, my technique should have been better?
Right. I'm guilty of saying that.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody says it. I've said it, But the reality is, if your technique is better, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Right? I mean, how many times have you seen, any of the top level guys? How many times have you seen Craig Jones go, man, like, if I was just stronger, right? I mean, you don't see that. He just fought a guy who was 80 pounds bigger than him.
Well, I'm sure that the reason you see a lot of people now talking so much about strength and conditioning is you see at the high levels, the Gordon Ryans and these guys they have a great skill, but they're in incredible shape now too.
Oh, absolutely. The athletes, the jiu-jitsu athletes, are far more prepared today than they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Yeah, I mean 100%.
Do you think a guy like Gordon Ryan would be better off if he just he obviously does a ton of jiu-jitsu, but he obviously works out a lot to get to have to be in the physique that he has now. You think he'd be better off if he stopped all the weights and just took that time and used it in the gym?
I think Gordon Ryan was a better fighter pre the last 70 pounds he put on. I think he was a better fighter when he was 150 to 170 pounds. He fluctuated there for a while before jumping up to 220. I think he was a much smoother, much prettier jiu-jitsu than, and that's not to take anything away from him. He's got pretty jiu-jitsu now, but he was much smoother. And I remember watching him thinking he was very slick. And then I watched him after he ballooned up to like 220 or 230, and he fought at some like Grappling Industries. Like he came in just to like wreck that division, and he was gigantic. And there's nobody there to compete with him. There's nobody at his level. But it was almost like he was moving through molasses. And then some of that was adjusting to the bulk that he put on. He's obviously adjusted. He's much faster now than he used to be, but his jiu-jitsu, again, not nearly as pretty to me. It feels, every time he moves now, it begs the question of, is it because he really had an off balance, he really had a pretty setup, or is it just because he forced it to happen? And again, but going back to the whole strategist, tactician type of thing, Gordon Ryan is a great example of one, that he is very much a strategist, very much a tactician.
Who are guys that come to mind while we're thinking about it that are ultimate strategists that you watch and see? They clearly have gone through in their head over and over systems and...
Well, both of the Ryans, both Gordon and Nicky, that's because of John Danaher,
That is, all right, John Danaher is I think, like the epitome of a guy who is this, like the ultimate strategist.
Yes. He has to be.
Right. He's a great example of like a general.
Yeah, he has to be, because he's got, physical deficiencies. He's got hip and knee issues. He has to strategize everything. He cannot allow, for adaptability or versatility, because it's in that moment that something could go bad and his body could not take the pressure,
Yeah, I enjoy his social media posts, because he always is having paragraphs of just breakdowns of things where I
think his paragraphs are almost as impressive as the systems he's created, because it frustrates the hell out of me to type more than 3 sentences in an Instagram post.
I know.
Can you imagine sitting there all day typing those 18
he has to do
paragraph essays?
He has to use like speech to text to do that. I would go crazy. Although then if you did speech to text,
then you gotta go back and fix it.
You have to go back throughout the whole thing.
No, my guess is he uses he probably types it up on an email and then downloads it to his phone. That would be my guess, and he just copies and pastes.
What kind of effect do you think a guy like him is having right now on the way people view jiu-jitsu? Because he does go very deep in his analysis.
There's a lot of imitators out there.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a lot of good imitators. So, when we talk about the innovator and the tactician, right? Brazilian culture tends to be more loosey-goosey and tends to be more, make things happen and fly, do whatever they want whenever they want, more spontaneous.
I know there's a stereotype of jiu-jitsu classes where you come in and the instructor
just whatever they want,
teaches whatever they want for that day, and it just kind of bounces all over the board.
And there's a word in Portuguese that you can't really translate to English. But it means something along the lines of the feel. Brazilians have a feel for certain things. That's why in the sports that the Brazilians focus on, they tend to do better than other countries. You look at soccer. There's nothing special about Brazilian soccer, but other teams, they try to copy it, but they can't quite do it as well. There's a certain feel that they have with the game, right? It's the same thing for jiu-jitsu. There's a certain feel, and part of that arises from years and years and years of having to piece together classes that have absolutely no train of thought. It's like today it's arm bars, tomorrow it's chokes from the back, and hey, figure this shit out. And the entire culture is okay with it because that's kind of how they operate. There's not necessarily a system to things, right? Where I think in American culture, everything tends to be a little bit more standardized, a little bit more systemized. You look at schools, how school operates here, how college courses are done, And it was only a matter of time before a generation of Americans became black belts and started teaching, right? And with that, those teachers tend to be a little bit more systematic, or at least they try to be, because they hated the sporadic, the ambiguous teaching that came from the Brazilians.
And their students start to require it.
Well, right, because now I have the option of going to this guy that's crazy, is all over the place, a Brazilian, and the guy who's a little bit more thinks a little bit more like me, right? And,
yeah, this guy over here who every class is different, and then I don't know when I'm gonna get my next
anything.
The next basically gold star telling me I did a good job, right. And that. But I could go to this place, and I know if I have this many hours, I'll
right,
get something.
Right, and it becomes a cultural thing, and you know, it was bound to happen where, you know, John Danaher is not the first person to create systems. It's not the first person to put, you know, a combination of attacks or series of attacks together, and he won't be the last. What John Danaher did is popularize the system, make it mainstream, right? So for years and years and years, I've been teaching the same way. I've not really changed much of my teaching style as far as like the progression of techniques. But I'm just doing me. Like I have no platform to push that, and I'm not saying that I'm doing anywhere near his level or better than him. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there's plenty of other people that have been doing it maybe even longer than him, but have never had the platform. You know, John Danaher has been teaching for 20 some years. When did you hear John Danaher? You know, at most 4 years ago, 3-4 years ago, and that's when the Danaher Death Squad arrived at the scene and they started winning. But before then, the only people that ever heard of John Danaher were the MMA fans, and he was just like this secondary coach to George St. Pierre. Mm-hmm. And you know, but because it got this huge boom of publicity, where now social media is a huge factor in the jiu-jitsu community, he got popularized and people listen to his voice. He's got a reach, right? And he's telling people, hey, a systemized approach is better than one that is not. And now everybody's like, hey, I got a system too. And the reality is, a lot of those people were probably already doing something like it. Maybe not something as good, but something to that sort.
I think one of his skills that makes him so popular is his ability to articulate the system in a way that you understand. Because I'm sure, like you said, there are people who have had systems in the past, but maybe English wasn't their native language, so they couldn't get that access to a huge swath of jiu-jitsu people as easily as Danaher, who comes in, can just break down things in a philosophical way almost, because I know he has that background.
Right, and his accent does help. That's something I've heard a lot is when you have an accent, people tend to focus on you a little bit more.
Can you do an impression of it?
No.
All right, I just thought I'd check.
But, you know, generally speaking, if you have an accent, people tend to focus more on you because they have to. When you have the fancier sounding accents, let's say an Australian or British accent, people tend to be drawn to that, Scottish accents. But the whole thing with him is he is a highly educated individual who also happens to be very intelligent. And he is an addict when it comes to martial arts. The dude does nothing. I mean, he just trains, watches, studies, reviews. And when you can see it physically because he only wears rash guards. Well, no, he's a practical guy. It has nothing to do with
Oh, all right. You've said this before.
Yes. He's a practical guy.
I still don't think it's the most...
It is the most practical outfit. And I'm not a supporter of fanny packs in any mean, but it is the most practical outfit.
But would you say fanny packs are practical then?
No.
Why is a rash guard practical but a fanny pack's impractical?
If I have to carry that much shit that I need a fanny pack, like I'm already not being practical.
But if I have a life that requires such a streamlined,
then your life is
jacket.
Not the rash guard is simply because it dries quickly and it's easy to wash.
If I'm sweating so profusely and so lazy that I have to worry about washing things, then I've got issues.
Or it's efficient, because when you wash them, you're gonna have to wash them anyways, no matter what you wear.
But a fanny pack helps you wear things efficiently and safely.
Again, my point is, why do you need so many things to put in a fanny pack?
I mean, if you just carry a phone, your wallet
that's
and
it.
keys.
Keys maybe. You're in New York. You don't need keys.
Well, you need to get in your apartment.
Sure. That's it. That's all you need. There is absolutely zero that is
What
required.
if you like to wear shorts that don't have like pockets? You wear gi shorts.
You mean like trunks, swim trunks?
Or like gi shorts.
The dude does no gi. Like, that's his big focus.
Yeah, so if he's walking around in gi shorts, he has to have the fanny pack to throw his stuff in there because he doesn't have pockets.
No, I don't support that.
All right, we'll both agree. You don't have to wear fanny packs, and I don't have to wear rash guards
Oh,
around.
absolutely.
All right, that's fair enough. But yeah, his life is jujitsu.
Right, but again, there's plenty of other people whose lives are jiu-jitsu, but they're not all educated. They're not all as eloquent. They may not be as intelligent, because you can be educated, just not be as intelligent too. And he has devoted, like, he has a life of a monk, you know, right? Like, the dude really doesn't have family, takes no vacations, doesn't buy anything extravagant, has little known vices, you know.
He does have an expensive habit. He has a really expensive doll collection, like old Victorian porcelain dolls.
Oh, wow. That's surprising.
I just want to put that rumor out there.
But anyways, so, you know, he popularized the idea of a system, but, you know, there's plenty of other people who've done it. You know, you take a guy like De La Riva, right, back in the 80s. You can't tell me that De La Riva doesn't have a system for the De La Riva guard. Like, that's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. You know, he has to have a system. His mind has to operate that way in order to develop and create a new guard. Now, whether he teaches that system, that's a whole entirely different thing. Whether he is able to be aware that, hey, I have a system in my head, I need to pass it on, because for him it just may be something he does, right? So there's a little bit of awareness there too, you know. So, and
Danaher's coming up with all these things are coming together in a time where you have podcast, YouTube, right? You can easily get that stuff. It's like
the perfect storm. Him waiting to release those DVDs or his series of DVDs was brilliant. He could have released them when he was teaching St. Pierre. He's like, hey, I'm St. Pierre's coach. Well, St. Pierre's a champion. Learn the stuff that he's learning. He didn't do it then. He could have done it when Eddie Cummings and Gary Tonin were tearing up all the underground competitions around New York, which there's like camcorder footage of. He didn't. He could have done it when they started winning the EBIs. He didn't. He waited until the perfect boom of the ADCC is happening. I have 3 students going to ADCC. You know, St. Pierre's making a comeback to the UFC to get the belt from, you know, Michael Bisping. And he's going to win by submission, right? Where everybody wants to interview me because of all my athletes doing so well. I have a bunch of shit talkers, for good or bad. Most of my guys are shit talkers, which brings attention to me and my team, right? My team continues to dominate. It's like a perfect storm to then say, hey, do what we're doing and present those DVDs.
Right. Do you ever buy DVDs or get into the videos that people put out in series?
I've personally never bought a DVD. I have seen some, but I have never bought myself and never spent the money.
Just don't feel the need to?
No, it's not so much I don't feel a need to. I think that generally speaking, 95% of any instruction out there is complete horseshit. And the 5% that are there, the 5% that are there, the techniques don't mean as much as the concepts behind it, and very few of those are good enough for you to extract concepts from, or at least for me, right? Because they may be saying things that I already know, so it's not worth the money. You know, as a blue belt, purple belt, brown belt, you may think, oh, the techniques is what I need. Well, no. What you really need is the idea behind the technique, right? A kimura is a kimura. That doesn't change. An armbar is an armbar. You can be upside down, you know, face up. It does not matter. It's an armbar. It's the same mechanic. But the idea behind the armbar, the concept behind the armbar, or the motive as to why doing this versus something else, that is valuable. That's what helps build and secure a system. And there's, from those 5%, there's very few that have any worth in that regard.
I haven't really been tempted in the past to put the money out to get the DVDs, but the Danaher ones are interesting to me because it seems like he is big into concepts.
Right. I have heard I have heard from people that I look up to in jiu-jitsu that while it's great stuff, it's very verbose. And Einstein said that if you can't explain something to a 6-year-old, then you just don't understand it well enough. That's not to say that Danaher does not know jiu-jitsu. That is just to say that maybe he's over-chewing.
He could explain it to a 6-year-old, but he maybe just puts a little extra to it that...
I think he's teaching to a first grade, like a 1-year-old.
Okay.
You know, that's the problem. Like with same thing with Rickson. Like Rickson, I've had plenty of people that have gone to attend Rickson's classes, and they're like, man, Rickson showed 18 techniques in this class. It was like one after the other in like a 20-minute period. Rickson's brain operates at that speed. He can comprehend 20 techniques or 18 techniques in 20 minutes. You may not. Mm-hmm. So you go home learning one of 18, thinking you're, a piece of shit. I think he does a little bit too much of the other side. He assumes you're too stupid to keep up.
Right.
So I'm not going to explain it once clearly or even twice. It's a DVD. I can rewind and watch it again if I have questions, right? I'm going to explain it 18 times because then you can get it.
Right.
Right. Which is okay. It's better to err on that side than on the side of, I'm just going to assume you're going to understand, right? It's better to err on the side that you're too slow than the side that you're too fast. Again, nothing wrong with it. Maybe they're worth buying.
Where do you go to get info and learn more about jiu-jitsu? Because you're not around, you don't get to go around the world and see black belts as often as I'm sure you'd like. You do seminars, so you get to see them. Where, when you're doing your research, what outlets do you reach for? Or do you just pour through a ton of articles and videos?
I mean, I do a bunch of stuff, I have seen videos. I have seen instructionals, right? People have given them to me, and I have seen those. Like I said, a lot of them don't have a great value. I think most of the biggest booms I've ever had in my career were early on when I would visit Stambowski, because he's got a huge number of students. He's got like 500 students at his school. So there's 10 classes a day. You're going to get a variety of people, a variety of levels and situations. Plus, he's got a great mind. So I learned a lot from there, and I tried to visit him once or twice a year to draw from him, right? But I think lately the biggest growth in the jiu-jitsu for me has been trying to understand behavior. So like patterns, like I said, like watching the Mundials, right, the World Tournament, and kind of going through them. ADCC. When ADCC happens, I watch every match, including like the very beginning matches, which are not very good, and I look for patterns. Why are they doing this way? An example of a guy who I spent quite a bit of time studying, particularly after his style was replicated, was Felipe Pena, right? So also a huge athlete, very much on the side of he's the innovator to Gordon Ryan's tactician, right? So Gordon Ryan fought him and lost, right, the first time, and then they met again at ADCC, and Gordon Ryan set up a heel hook on Felipe Pena, and Felipe Pena defended in a way that was completely unorthodox and completely unexpected, which plays into his agent of chaos, like we talked about. And Gordon Ryan did not have a response for it. He was an innovator enough that the system that Gordon Ryan employed was not big enough to accommodate, right? And I thought, okay, it's a fluke. Felipe Pena is a freak athlete. He's strong. He's fast. Gordon Ryan himself has said Felipe Pena is the strongest guy he's ever grappled. I checked it off as he's just big and strong and athletic. And that nullified Gordon Ryan athleticism. And then the technique, the position was kind of, 50-50 there. However, Gordon fought Vinny Magalhães a few months after ADCC and set up Vinny with the exact same heel hook he set up Felipe Pena, and he got it. Except Vinny imitated Felipe Pena moved the exact same way. Gordon Ryan still had no answer for it. And not only did this happen once in that fight, it happened twice. Gordon Ryan was able to recover, re-enter into the leg lock, re-enter into the heel hook. Vinny did it again. And Vinny was super arrogant afterwards, right? Like, leg locks don't work. He's like shaking his finger and all that stuff. And this is no fault to Gordon Ryan, right? Because I think he's very much a tactician. But both Felipe Pena and Vinny Magalhães are Brazilians, so by default, most of their training has been done around Brazilians or in Brazil, where the creative, the innovator is prevalent, right? Mm-hmm. And Gordon Ryan has been training under the ultimate tactician. So what's going to happen if it hasn't already happened, right? Gordon Ryan, not Eddie Cummings anymore, but Gordon Ryan and Gary Tonin, Nicky Ryan, Danaher, I'm sure that they've not only studied how Felipe Pena and Vinny they found a weakness in their system, but they've found counters and ways to exploit it or avoid it so it doesn't happen again, right? And that's part of the tactician side. They have to keep adding because of the innovator.
Well, as far as you learning, it sounds like you kind of just go to like the raw data now, not necessarily the theorizing. I will go to people kind of regurgitating things and looking at the data and going, hey, here's what we found.
Right.
You will go and just watch the hours of competition and action, right, and then kind of analyze from there.
Right.
Well, I don't have the time.
Oh, I don't either. That's why I don't sleep.
Well, that's one way to do it. Do you see any downsides to strategizing? Can people over-strategize? Hesitate, be afraid to pull a trigger because they're thinking of what may happen.
So the issue I have is not with the person that over-engineers the system. The issue I have is with the person that believes they have a system, right? Here's why. There's a huge boom for the drill to win movement, right? There's books on it even, where you're going to do this half guard pass 1,000 times a day for 6 months. That is going to be the only pass you'll learn. Maybe you'll learn 2 passes and you're going to do the second pass for another 6 months, another 1,000 times a day. And you're going to become the ultimate expert at this pass. You're going to become so good that nobody can stop that pass because you're just going to stick to it. And you're going to do it again and again and again. And if you can't get it, you just reset and go again until you get it. Because once you get to certain steps, you're so good at it, nobody can stop. And it's very easy to become very good early on as a white belt or blue belt if you do that, right? If I give you one move in each position and I say, hey, do this 1 billion times, as a blue belt, you can go out and wreck competitions because you just got more rep time, right? The problem with that is not a system, right? That is a pattern of behavior, meaning you're like a train on tracks, right? As long as you're on those tracks, you're pretty much unstoppable, right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter how slow the train's moving, you're never going to stop that train. There's too much power behind it, right? Until you get a guy who's an innovator or somebody with a true system that knocks that train slightly off tracks. And now you don't know how to get back into it because you've never spent the time figuring out different roads or different tracks to get back on the track that you want to be on, or the ability to even read a map, right? The person that thinks they have a system but does not actually have a system, that is a person I have a problem with. Okay. Because they may be successful enough early on that it's very hard to argue results with them, you know?
So don't confuse a well-rehearsed couple of actions for a thorough system.
Correct. Don't get me wrong. Every system, at the end of the day, has to be well-rehearsed. But just because you've rehearsed something very well does not mean it's a system.
You have to understand the meaning behind something. You can't just know that...
Right. Your system has to account for you failing. Mm. That's what I'm saying. Like, your plans have to account for your plans not working. And when you don't, because you're only doing this, like this has to work, right? Then you don't have a system.
All right, that's good for now. We're gonna take off, and everyone have a great week. We'll see you later.